Hello and welcome everyone to the RCC's second online side event in the framework of the UNEC Regional Forum on Sustainable Development in Europe. Following yesterday's presentation of the Southeast Europe 2030 strategy, it is my pleasure to open today's event titled Coordination with Donors and Official Development Assistance in SDGs in the context of the SEE2030 strategy. Today's event will be moderated by RCC's own Professor Dr. Tanja Miščević. Before beginning, I would like to remind the audience that the panel discussion will be followed by a Q&A session, and that the audience members may ask their questions during the panel discussion in the chat box. You should also note that the event is being streamlined on RCC's YouTube and Twitter channels. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Tanja Miščević, who is currently a Deputy Secretary General of the RCC, or the Regional Cooperation Council. She was head of the negotiating team for the accession of Serbia to the European Union, and she is a full-time professor at the Faculty of Political Sciences in Belgrade. Previously, Professor Miščević was special advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister responsible for foreign trade in Serbian government, State Secretary for Defense Policy at the Ministry of Defense, as well as Vice President and a member of the board of the Anti-Corruption Agency in Serbia. From 2005 to 2009, she was Director of the European Integration Office of the Government of Serbia. Professor Miščević teaches international organizations, UN system, EU enlargement policy, and history of European integration. She will be presenting also the panelists of today. Dear Tanja, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear Petra, dear Umut, all others participating. It is my great pleasure to be here with you today. Before we start with the panel, I would also like to share some of the thoughts and some of experience of the Regional Cooperation Council working on the strategy SE 2030, particularly dealing with so many discussions with all of you, grateful to all of you in terms of the donor coordination for the achievement, not only the SE 2030 strategy to be implemented, but to help the national authority in this huge endeavor, and actually to help and support the endeavor of the socio-economic development of all members of the United Nations. But since we manage to endorse the strategy last year in Antalya, mid last year, we also saw a lot of developments. It's not only the pandemic and the very difficult recovery, which help us to understand that the regional cooperation is the best tool for achieving results which will bring the collective benefit. But we are now, since February, confronting another unfortunate challenge, a huge challenge in our region, which creates a substantial risk that not only threatens humanitarian aspects, but also has the potential to track our region, off our region from its efforts in reaching the SDGs by 2030. And that is exactly the momentum. This is the environment when the SECP took a critical step forward by endorsing the Southeast Europe 2030 strategy, as we call SE 2030, in order to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals across the three dimensions, which is of course the peace, prosperity, and partnership. Let me just remind you shortly. For all others, not the panelists, as they are very well aware of the of our priorities and the objectives of the strategy. They are to reach the sustainable economic growth through reducing poverty and inequality, then improving social inclusion, empowering women, then decelerating the population of the SEE region through enhancing quality of life for its citizens. Then, of course, speeding up the green and digital transition without widening socioeconomic inequalities and disrupting competitiveness and private sector development through a genuinely regional non-political process. Also, it is worth mentioning that actually the strategy has its own governance structure, which composed of national coordinators from each and every of the SEE economy. In our first meeting, the monitoring committee adopted the following criteria regarding prioritization of the SEE2030 programming activities, aiming at the relevance and policy integration, private sector orientation, people first focus, donor priority alignment, stakeholder engagement, long-term vision, and policy coordination. Of course, the aid effectiveness is one of the key priorities for the implementation of the strategy SEE2030. As we know, the work on financing the UN 2030 agenda is three-pronged: mobilization, alignment, and impact. There is a need to ensure that the development cooperation approach and tools can effectively respond to the new complexity of sustainable development by providing appropriate support to countries as they transition through different phases of the development. OSCE DAC statistic remind the global standard. However, it requires continued effort to collect, verify, but also compare and publish data on official development assistance on ODA and beyond through updated methodological monitoring of membership compliance with the reporting rules and with specific development assistance committee, DAC. Recommendations, data quality review, capacity building, workshops, and statistical peer reviews are also elements of this exercise. To help achieve the SDGs in developing countries, development cooperation actually provides need and a comprehensive measure of sustainable development financing that suits partners' country needs, facilitate country-level planning processes, and increases international transparency with information on a broader set of resources at country, regional, and, of course, global level from all providers. The existing availability in net ODA in SEE is in its decreasing trend in real terms. Despite decreasing regional trend in net ODA, the 6 economies of the CCP have become one of the top recipients of net ODA per capita in the world. Accordingly, the 6 economies of the cooperation process for the Southeast Europe cooperation process received $94 per capita as net ODA, while this per capita rate stood at $24.5 in SEE as a regional average. If we, on the other hand, look at the total support for sustainable development heading to the Southeast Europe, we see that the largest sector benefits from the total support for the sustainable development is banking and financial services. While humanitarian aid due to the existing refugee crisis from Syria ranks the second. And the third and fourth policy sector receive that type of support are transport and storage and government and civil society. Then it is important to know that 70% of total support for sustainable development received by SEE recipients are not marked to correlate with SDGs. It is therefore difficult to comment on the SDG-related priorities aimed to be supported by total support for sustainable development in the representative manner. Based on the reported demarcation of this total support per SDG, and with some caution, it could be stated that SDG 7, which is affordable and clean energy, then 9, industry innovation infrastructure, then SDG 11, sustainable citizen communities, as well as SDG 13, climate action, are those which actually the total support for sustainable development targeted the most in, of course, SEE region as such. While I may say that SDG-related challenges in the Southeast Europe are much wider than the ones addressed by the donors, according to the latest available data in the Sustainable Development Report published in 2021, the SEE region is confronted with challenges to be on track to meet their SDG 2, zero hunger, 3, good health and well-being, SDG 5, gender equality, SDGs 9, industry innovation infrastructure, then SDG 10, reduce inequality, SDG 11, sustainable citizen communities, 12, responsible consumption and production, 14, life below water, and SDG 15, life on land. And as you may assume, due to the current unfortunate event, SDG 16, dealing with peace and justice, strong institution, would also be challenged for the whole of the region. It's known fact that the allocation of fodder per policy objective would be time limited in line with the viability of each policy objective supported. Thus, it would be logical to utilize the abundant availability of funds to support the SEE's mid to long-term sustainable economic growth perspective to maximum extent possible. For today's session, our objective is to highlight the very importance of aid effectiveness principles, which are adopted by the Paris Framework and Addis Ababa Action Agenda. Many sustainable development-related challenges in our region require revising policy option in programming order to increase their effectiveness and to support SEE recipient economies' efforts to reach the sustainable development goals. In that context, our strategy, SEE2030 strategy, strongly rely on aid effectiveness principles, which could be considered as a good practice. During our today's event, we will have representatives from the OSCE Development Cooperation Directorate and Turkey, Greece, Croatia as SEE economies, who have also the role to act as donors in our region, as well as the ones participating in the implementation of the SEE2030 strategy. We do believe that such a the setup combining both roles in the same strategic intervention heading to the SDGs will give a unique opportunity to reach the principle of ownership, alignment, and harmonization as foreseen by the actually Paris framework. So if you don't mind, let me start immediately with the panel of today. We named the panel discussion on aid effectiveness and correlation between SDGs and ODA in the context of SE2030 strategy. It is my great pleasure to really host dear colleagues, but also friends that we gained during the process of preparing the SE2030 and discussing about development for the implementation and aid effectiveness. First of those helps and friends that we gained during the process is actually the representative of the OSCE, Mr. Haeshute, sorry, OECD, my mistake. Mr. Haeshute is the senior counselor and head of financing for Sustainable Development Division of Development Cooperation Directorate at the OECD. Mr. Shute is actually focused with his work on how to address the dual challenges at the core of the 2030 agenda. Actually, it means how to mobilize unprecedented volumes of resources and leaving no one behind. Mr. Shute was actually for some time now with the OECD, and he oversees the provision of data standards as well as policy analysis and guidance to the OECD members and DAC as the committee of the OECD. Previously, Haye held management position in the German group, KfW, and has worked with the ILO, another partner of the RCC. He holds as the part of his curriculum vitae, holds an executive master from Business School, Oxford, graduate degree in economics from the London School of Economics, and Freie University Berlin, and development studies from the German Development Institute. As I said previously, OECD has been very present in during the preparation of the strategy, but also when discussing with them on the implementation of the general SDG and reaching the agenda of 2030. For this, we are grateful to the OECD and to you, Mr. Schutte. So without further ado, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, colleagues. It is great to be here, and I'm really thank you for being invited to address you about the topic that the chair outlined. Just let me say, besides the institutional relationship OECD to your work, there's also a personal relationship in the sense that a while ago, while still being with KfW, the German Development Bank, for 4 years or 5 years almost, I was working in the region in different countries, in Belgrade, in Sarajevo. I was in Kosovo, Turkey. So it reminds me very strongly about the very good memories I have of the region and its development. And just to also say that for a year or so, I was seconded to the Stability Pact of Southeastern Europe. That was in 21 as an expert that was responsible for coordinating the energy activities, also there with the support from the European Union. And I understand that the Stability Pact then obviously morphed into and was further developed by your institution. I must say it was fascinating for me to read into your strategy, into the concept note that you shared with me in prior to the meeting, and I'm thrilled really to be with you today. I think I will very much follow along the lines that the professor just outlined, basically say a few words about financing, be it ODA, be it the broader resources that are in principle available and that need to be mobilized in order to fund the SDGs, also in your region. but also how to not mobilize only, but also to align these resources to the greatest effect. And for that, I have prepared, I think, some 4 or 5 slides. And if you could kindly share my short presentation, that would be most excellent. Just to say, could I have the next slide? I think we are all very well aware with the impact that the COVID crisis has or is having still on the SDG financing gap. We basically see something that we refer to as a scissor effect. Basically, on the one hand, an increasing need coupled with declining public and private resources in many parts of the world, including obviously in developing countries. So we currently estimate that the SDG financing gap in developing countries has increased by some 50%. So from 2.5 trillion pre-crisis to something like 3.7 trillion over the period. And that is, as you see here in the graph, a combination on the one hand, as I said earlier, of additional needs, so about 1 trillion for COVID required recovering spending needs, but then obviously that is on top of the already existing 2.5 trillion that was estimated by the UN as the SDG financing gap. And on the other hand, we have seen a quite significant drop in the resources. Currently, we estimate that about in the magnitude of 250 billion in external private resources here, as an emphasis on that, but also in addition, obviously, the domestic public resources have been hit significantly. And that leads then to this even more challenging funding situation for many countries, be it developing countries, but obviously also in part of your region. I may say that the drop was not as dramatic as we had estimated that at the beginning in 2020 of the COVID crisis, where we had projected even a higher fall in the external financing. And it was due to the strong entry, basically, of the international financial systems, the development financial systems, mostly also from the multilaterals, plus also the strong recovery and the stability of China that has, from a global perspective, has led to a less of a drop of overall resources than we initially had projected. But nevertheless, the challenge continues to be extremely high and is something where the international community obviously needs to continue to strive and to make progress. And our members, but also other players, are really called upon to step up their engagement here. Could I go to the next slide? Now, the professor just referred to the critical role, obviously, of official development aid. So these are the highly concessional resources that are being provided by the 30 members of the DAC, the OECD committee, as the professor was saying, that is meeting since many years here at the OECD and is basically holding each other to account, is providing standards and guidance to its work, but also does a lot of analytical work that guides, I think, the broader development cooperation community. Now, ODA is and was in 2020, and we are going to publish data for 2021 just in a week's time on Tuesday, has in 2020 reached its highest level with 161.2 billion. So that has been an increase compared to 2019 by 3.5%, but nevertheless clearly acknowledging also that this on average only represents 0.32% of the DAC members' combined gross national income. And you're all aware that the international objective and the commitment is to have a much higher GNI ODA ratio of 0.7%. So while some members, our members, reach the 0.7, many unfortunately do not. Now, net ODA flows to bilateral projects, programs, and technical assistance represent about half of this total net ODA, and that has rose considerably. Whereas then contributions to multilateral organizations, and I've seen from the data that you also shared in preparation that obviously that many number of multilateral organizations are very, very active in your region and provide the bulk of resources, have increased by 9%. So overall, that is something that, despite falling short of the overall level of ambition of a commitment, I think what, at least from our side here from the OECD, we have to note that ODA has increased its resilience in crisis situation, that overall members step up in providing more resources also for an inclusive recovery, and that there is additional funding coming forward to support developing countries in exceptional circumstances. Now, I think the chair, the professor, has nicely made a couple of points that you see here graphically depicted on the right-hand side. Obviously, ODA cannot do it alone. We are all aware that that ODA is a scarce good, if you like, and that these ODA resources need to be complemented by both international but also domestic resources. And then we need to continue to innovate the financial instruments that basically will allow us to leverage the resources that are available. And in the graph, you see here the declining, sloping down of the blue line. So that's basically ODA as countries' GNI per capita is increasing over time. So you see this basically from our data, and that is stylized in this graphics. It's declining ODA, but you have other resources that initially picks up, and that, for example, the green line here, this is private finance flows, then tend to increase basically with the growing wealth of countries over time, and is replacing other resources. Here, maybe the other line that I just pointed for your attention is the one that the dotted black one, where you see that tax revenue tends to increase over initial levels that we consider as not sufficient to fund government and public services, then to more comfortable levels as the income is increasing. But let me just say maybe one word again, and I think that is applicable, we hope, at least also for your regions, obviously, to make the best out of highly concessional funding by tapping into other resources, mobilizing resources. You're all aware of blended finance instruments, de-risking instruments that has been highlighted in your strategy and also in your concept note for Southeast Europe. Could I have the next slide, please? So coming maybe to the topic here, how development budgets could be better leveraged for the post-COVID recovery. We are all aware of the massive financial resources that are out there. Something like 379 trillion of global assets are basically floating around. In principle, they are looking for an investment opportunity. Obviously, emerging countries provide quite a number of attractive investment opportunities. More resources will need to be spent also when it comes to the transition towards the net zero or low carbon growth pathway, especially in emerging countries. So there is an opportunity out there. And we have seen also from from data that we have been receiving that from 2018 to 2020, overall global sustainable investments have increased by some 15%. So it is not only that overall we see some positive trends, but I think we see a trend towards more sustainable investments. And we need to combine that also with the decrease in the misalignment of resources that are not aligned with the SDGs. And I think the professor just mentioned a couple of pointers in regard to the alignment of funding in your region with different SDGs. So what we think going forward is really that we need to, as you see here graphically depicted, a mobilization of many resources from different funding from different sources, be it institutional investors, retail investors, development countries, developed countries resources, domestic resources. We need to then align this to the SDGs, and the professor has also indicated to some work that the OECD is doing in support of the UN, such as the Total Official Support for Sustainable Development, or TOSSD, or TOST as an acronym that basically allows to more broadly capture resources in line with the SDGs, but also a framework that together with UNDP, my team developed during the G7 presidency of France, where we basically created a framework to determine whether financial flows are aligned with SDGs. And then here you see it depicted on the graph. We need to make sure that these aligned resources then really have a measurable impact and are being used to the greatest extent. And that's, as the chair was referring to, obviously the development effective principles have a prominent role to play. Could I have the next slide, please? And I think that is my last slide. Yes. So going forward, what we see is really that we need to do two crucial steps to better align global finance with the SDGs. Obviously, we need to continue to implement the Addis Ababa Action Agenda from 2015 with, we believe, a dual focus both on sustainability, but also equality. And yes, we need to move towards a more sustainable way of being. So thereby we have to enhance the quality, the catalytic effect and the impact of public finance on sustainable development. But we also believe that growing inequality is obviously one of the greatest challenges that we are facing. So we really have to shore up levels of public spending on the SDGs in developing countries. The second step is then to basically increase the integrity and the efficiency of global financial markets, be it asset managers, bank or institutional investors, in order to have a stronger sense of market integrity, of mechanisms for transparency and accountability of private sustainable finance investments, as well as strengthened efficiency of markets, and here to create incentives and policy coherence to invest for the good of people and planet. Let me just conclude with a couple of remarks that picks up again issues that the chair already has met. So we have to invest into the financing of the green transition. The chair mentioned this, and at the same time we have to be also aware of that we avoid diversion risks. So basically the issue that sustainability then may impede resources flowing to emerging markets, to developing countries, as the level, for example, for non-disclosure of financial resources are being heightened, and therefore may lead to sustainability-minded financiers to step into being part of meeting the financing gap in emerging economies. The second one is we feel very strongly that trade and investments need to be restored, and that the quality of investments need to be increased through trade and adequate investment policies to support more and better quality jobs in emerging markets. A third area, and I think that's also highlighted in your strategy, is obviously this whole transformation towards a more digital economy. Obviously, the digitalization of trade is here something to note for, and there is an opportunity there for emerging markets, obviously, to kind of potentially even leapfrog certain developments. And I think there are some examples in your region that companies actually do this. Maybe with one last two comments. One is obviously we feel that the multilateral system needs to be even more stronger, more efficiently used. As I mentioned earlier, members from the OECD DAC are challenging funding through the multilateral development system. And the COVID crisis has accelerated that trend. So the multilateral system vis-a-vis the bilaterals have gained in prominence. But you are all aware that quite often then this increase of funding that is coming from the multilateral system can be also of a non-concessional nature and is targeting more, we see this from the data that we are gathering, more towards middle income countries and the productive sectors. We have there once again the challenge not to risk to leave people behind, be it in low income countries, but also when it comes to the critical investments that are necessary in the social sector, such as health. And the COVID crisis is obviously here a reminder for us to do this. And my last remark, and that comes back again to something that the chair was saying, we're needing to move further on the effectiveness agenda. Given the constrained financial budgets, we really need to make a strong effort to maximize the impact and the effectiveness of development cooperation at large, of development finance more narrowly. As you may know, the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation is hosting a summit in mid-December, where basically not only they are aiming to modernize the way of working, a new narrative, but I think very, very crucially, the objective here is also to strengthen, if you like, effectiveness at the country level. So, for example, in your region. And with that, once again, a big, big thank you for having me here today, and I'm looking forward to the panelists. And over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hute. Dear Hute, of course, for being here and sharing much of the agreement in terms of what I said in my introductory speech regarding the aid effectiveness and the support and help for the implementation of the SDGs. So now we are going to go further into our panel discussion, which we named How Are SDGs Correlated to National Order Programs. We are very happy to have with us the SECP donors. We will start with the first of them, the representative of the Turkish Cooperation and Coordination Agency, very well known as TICA. And we are honored to have Dr. Rahman Nurdun, the Vice President of TICA. Very short intro. So Dr. Nurdun actually received his PhD degree from Hacettepe University, Ankara in 2002, and he started a professional career as an expert in TICA even before that. He was seconded as a project advisor to OECD MENA investment program between 2004 and 2005, and the same organization, OECD Partnership for Democratic Governance, between 2009 and 2010. He also served as a head of TICA Ulaanbaatar Program Coordinator Office between 2010 and 2011. And head of East and South Asia, Pacific and Latin America Department, a huge one, between 2014 and 2018. As a Vice President, Dr. Nurdun has been appointed in 2019. Before giving the floor to you, I hope that you will not mind to remind all of us of the great importance of TICA, of Turkey as such, being first in the world as biggest donor. Of course, per their GNI, and particularly grateful as the representative of the RCC to your country and of course to Tika for helping us and supporting us on our endeavor to help the implementation of the SDGs through the strategy SE2030 in the region that we belong to actually. So let me give the floor to Dr. Nurtun. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Excellencies, distinguished partners of SEECP, colleagues from OECD and RCC, dear participants, I would like to share. It's a great honor for me to have the opportunity to share my observations regarding aid effectiveness and the correlation between SDGs and OD in the context of SEE2030 strategy. I'd like to share you some slides. Okay. Well, as you know, Turkey assumed the SEECP chairmanship in office for 3 times. The first in 1998, 1999, and second one is 2009, 2010, and most recently it's in July 2020. I would like to take this occasion to wish Greece a fruitful term in her chairmanship in office. The Turkish chairmanship motto, "Neighbors see it together," also refers to the common future of the people of the Balkans who live side by side. This approach also drew the framework of Turkish chairmanship in office, priorities which outlined, and the 7 headings. Cooperation in the field of health in a post-COVID-19 period, brain drain, developing equality of human capital and education, connectivity, strengthening intra-regional infrastructure, increasing intra-regional and extra-regional trade, migration management, youth, culture and tourism, and security. Before proceeding to the core topic of SDGs and Turkey's national ODA activities, with your permission, I would like to briefly give you some information about Turkish development cooperation. Turkey has a long-standing tradition of development cooperation, which dates back to the 1920s. But it was really institutionalized with the establishment of TİKA, Turkish Cooperation Coordinating Agency, in 1992, initially to respond to the needs of newly independent states in the Central Asia and Caucasus. And since 2002, Turkish Cooperation and Coordination Agency engaged in various development cooperation activities in over 150 countries through 62 offices in 60 countries across 5 continents. In addition to implement Turkish bilateral projects and programs, TİKA plays a key coordination role for all Turkish stakeholders involved in development cooperation, including line ministries, public institutions, non-government organizations, and private sector in its bilateral cooperation. Turkey shares the knowledge and experience through TİKA with many countries from the Balkans to Africa, from Middle East to Latin America. Turkey, as a founding member of OECD, is an observer to the Development Assistance Committee DAC, with many countries, and also observer to the DAC, as I said. In 2016, Turkey participated in the meetings of DAC, including its high-level and senior-level meetings, as well as meetings of DAC International Network on Conflict and Fragility, and a Working Party on Development Finance Statistics. As an aid recipient country itself for many years, Turkey is well aware of the actual needs of partner countries. Therefore, our cooperation are tailored to meet the immediate needs of the partner countries. TİKA is dedicated to the mission of contributing to the sustainable social and economic development of the partner countries. Excellencies, distinguished partners, and their colleagues. At the international level, when Agenda 2030 was announced, Turkey has committed to a sustainable world and adoption of SDGs in every occasion, both at national and international level. Regarding the national level, Turkey has been among the first 22 countries that submitted voluntary national report in the first anniversary of SDGs 2016 high-level political forum. Since then, all government organizations and institutions have showed strong ownership on delivering SDG targets for everybody in the world. In line with the spirit of SDG, Turkey focuses its development cooperation and promoting food security and nutrition, addressing unemployment, combating inequality, and advancing the development agenda, conscious of the underlying role of peace, the rule of law, and governance in achieving development goals. TICA finances infrastructure projects for irrigation, sanitation, and transportation projects, schools and hospitals, and engage in triangular cooperation projects, including with the private sector. In 2020, with its total development assistance of almost $8.8 billion US, of which ODA is $8.12 US, with ODA GNI ratio of 1.17. Turkey was one of the few countries that fulfilled UN 0.7 ODA GNI target. I would like to underline the fact that despite the decreasing trend in net ODA globally, Turkey has increased until 2020. But this year, the pandemic has resulted in a slight decrease. However, still UN 0.7 ODA GNI target has been achieved. Turkey promotes leaving no one behind principle, both at home and abroad, and advocates raising the voice of developed countries in international decision-making mechanisms. As a non-traditional new emerging donor, Turkey supports partner efforts of UN least developed countries. I would like to highlight the peculiar information considering the SDGs and implementation in the context of national ODA programs. The establishment of a technology bank for LDC countries as a UN entity was started in Istanbul Action Plan, which was the outcome of 4th UN conference on the least developed countries hosted by Turkey in 2011. And Turkey pledged $2 million US for a period of 5 years in order to realize the establishment of LDC Technology Bank. I would like to highlight that before the adoption of SDG2030, the process of Technology Bank has started already, and the full establishment of the bank in 2018 marked the SDG 7.8 as the first global target achieved. Now the bank has stepped up to establish technology market maker labs in the SDG, and Turkey has been recently reviewed its pledge to financial support the bank for the next 5 years as well. Let's revisit the previous point I have made, that intervention of Turkey and the TICA are tailored to meet immediate needs of our partners. That is to say, in cases of protracted humanitarian crisis, almost every continent of the world require the most significant intervention, which is humanitarian assistance. The humanitarian assistance case load is rising, unfortunately. There are more people displaced by conflict today than any time since the Second World War. Syria, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine. SEE2030 partners are all influenced by the displaced people around us, around our region. In addition to that, the cost of natural hazard-related disasters is increasing dramatically, because both their frequency and severity has increased specifically. Droughts caused by climate change has been more frequent and severe as well. And this has resulted in another human mobility, especially in Africa. And the 2 SDG goals are directly related to those problems. Goal 1, 2, 3, 5, 11, 13, and 16. Furthermore, the COVID-19 outbreak is an ongoing disaster that hit millions of people all over the world. Unfortunately, it has exacerbated the challenges to achieving the 17 SDGs and highlights the need for shared framework for tackling global challenges. Distinguished partners and dear colleagues, Turkish government has assumed the humanitarian responsibility to continue cooperation in dire times of pandemic. To respond to the crisis, TICA has conducted nearly 150 COVID-19 related projects in 52 countries, 20 of which are LDCs. Workshops and manufacturing facilities, which were previously started by TICA, have become the place of medical equipment production. In the countries where TICA offices are located, the mask production capacity per week has been reached to 500,000 units. Therefore, a general overview of Turkish ODA shows that our greatest cooperation is on emergency relief and humanitarian assistance. According to 2020 Turkish Official Development Assistance Report by categories, that nearly $7.3 billion was spent for emergency and humanitarian purpose. Given the fact that in 2020, Turkish ODA was almost $8.1 billion, you can see the emergency and humanitarian assistance again took the lion's share. It is followed by education, infrastructure projects. Excellencies, distinguished participants, dear colleagues, according to the SDG report of 2021, there are strong challenges for SEE region to meet certain SDGs. And when you tap into that, you'll see that the region is doing well in meeting basic humanitarian needs like clean water, hunger, and shelter, but facing challenges in the areas of innovation industry, sustainable production and consumption, and gender equality. Therefore, in the context of achieving certain SDGs like this, the implementation of it requires ownership at all levels across all sectors, not only by the donor communities, economies. Turkey, as an observer of OECD DAC Committee, has participated in meetings for Paris Declaration on aid effectiveness. And since then, aid effectiveness has become a significant component of international cooperation agenda. The 5 principles of aid effectiveness, so-called smart aid, ownership, alignment, harmonization, managing results and mutual accountability. These principles are completely matched with Turkey's implementation of international cooperation agenda. Turkish cooperation is transparent, result-based, and there's no conditional, non-conditional, and accountable and aligned with the priorities of partner countries. The COVID-19 pandemic led to a reversal in SDG progress on many goals and indicators. Vulnerable groups and populations were particularly affected in Europe and the rest of the world. COVID-19 brought a negative impact on SDG performance across European countries. And the pandemic particularly affected economic prosperity and jobs, health, status, access to and equality of services. While bringing the principle of aid effectiveness and the commitment to achieve SDGs will help countries to be on track, we should always keep in mind that adverse effect of the pandemic will bring further gaps in SDG performance across regions and countries. And we should develop new innovative strategies to help them to mend the gaps to meet the SDG target. I thank you very much and hope you enjoy your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nurdun, for sharing with us your very rich experience. And again, very grateful to be here with us, not only today, but generally speaking as a support. Let me go further. Now is the turn to the representative of the chairmanship in office of the Southeast Europe cooperation process. And I have a great pleasure and honor to introduce to you Eleni Nicolaidou. Eleni is the Director and Expert Minister Counselor, Directorate of Development Cooperation Policy, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, from Greece, of course. By her education, Eleni holds 2 MA in International Business and Economic Development from the Reading University, England, and the MA on Accounting and Finance from the LSE University of London. Prior being Director of Development Cooperation Policy, Eleni served as the Special Advisor to various ministers, Minister of Economy, of Transport, Communication, as well as the Minister of Education. Before that, she was the head of International Relations Department, Hellenic Federation of Enterprises. Before giving the floor to Eleni, and you hear that this is a first name basis, which means that we really appreciate her help, support, but also guidance in dealing with the issue of the SDG implementation and helping us to understand better the issues of the aid coordination and how to utilize the knowledge of the region for the benefit of the region. So again, thank you very much on behalf of the RCC, dear Eleni, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you well.
Okay, great. That's great. Thank you very much, distinguished partners, distinguished participants, dear colleagues. I wish, first of all, to thank RCC for organizing this event, and thank you for inviting me to participate as a speaker. It's an honor. I wish to particularly thank Tanya Misevic and Omuter Kezer for the excellent work, the really excellent work they are doing on the Agenda 2030, Southeast Agenda 2030. I'm most grateful. I would like to start my presentation with a PowerPoint. I will try to upload it. Can you see it now? Yes?
Yes, we can, no problem.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, first of all, developing cooperation policy is a pillar of diplomacy. Therefore, Greece is involved in international dialogue through its participation and financial contributions to international and regional organizations and institutions like the EU, OECD, UN agencies, etc., so as to achieve a more effective international development cooperation and the implementation of Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development. Now, as regards the structure and systems of Hellenic Aid, Hellenic Aid is the competent national authority which shapes and coordinates Greek development policy. It is responsible for monitoring, coordinating, supervising, and promoting emergency humanitarian and development aid activities. ODA expenditure by other ministries includes multilateral contributions to the EU development cooperation budget and the UN agencies, as well as other international organizations. Greek embassies, missions abroad, participate in the various coordination meetings of the EU delegations. They are also responsible in monitoring bilateral programs. Membership to DAC OECD. Greece has been a member of the Development Assistance Committee of OECD since 1999, along with 28 other countries and the European Union. DAC sets the international principles and standards for development cooperation and monitors how donors deliver on their commitments. The overarching objective of DAC for the period 2018-2022 is to promote development cooperation and other relevant policies so as to contribute to the implementation of Agenda 2030. In this context, the overall development cooperation systems, policies, and structures of international development assistance is being reviewed, the so-called peer reviews, on a periodic basis. The fourth peer review of Greece took place in 2018. It was between April and November, 7 years after the last one, which was in 2011. At the end of this year, Greece will have its DAC midterm review, which will focus on implementation of the recommendations of the last DAC peer review in the context of developments that have taken place since 2018. In addition, Greece has been designated reviewer. This is an obligation by all members of DAC, together with Iceland, for the DAC peer review of Hungary, scheduled for the second part of 2022. In addition, our statistics on aid are closely monitored, and we operate with DAC statistical directives in full transparency and accountability. Total official support for sustainable development, the so-called TOST, is the new international standard for measuring the full array of resources in support of the 2030 agenda. The final proposal was adopted at the UN StatCom in March 2022, which means that TOST is now officially recognized as the data source in the SDG indicator framework for indicator 17.31, that is to say, foreign direct investment, ODA, South-South cooperation as a proportion of GNI. The increasing role of multilateral assistance. Greece's development aid has changed significantly over the last 10 years in terms of both its size and its composition. Total official development assistance of Greece, bilateral and multilateral, in 2020, it represented 0.17% of GNI, and multilateral assistance constituted 74% of total aid. Greece focuses mainly on multilateral development assistance and advances its national priorities, especially through the European Union and selected international organizations. Rather than adopt a specific multilateral development policy, the government engages with multilateral organizations when they present the most effective option in order to achieve Greece's overarching development cooperation policy objectives. Therefore, Greece provides substantial annual contributions to a number of multilateral organizations, including UNESCO, World Trade Organization, WHO, World Meteorological Organization, etc. The activities of these organizations are in turn closely linked with or contribute to the implementation of the SDGs in the framework of Agenda 2030. Greece contributions, for example, to Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, are expected to have a positive impact inter alia on the achievement of SDG 2 and SDG 14 at least. Therefore, it was a strategic choice to concentrate on multilateral assistance in the context of Greece's strategic priorities. Greece is committed to multilateralism and supports multilateral approaches to global problems. Development cooperation priorities are consistent with Greece's overall foreign policy objectives and help partner countries address their economic, social, and environmental problems. Greece has entered into partnerships with international organizations that operate in line with the national priorities. One of the recommendations of the 2018 DAC peer review was an ex-post evaluation of Greece's multilateral development assistance and see how much they contribute to the SDGs. It was carried out in 2018, and the aim of this ex-post evaluation was firstly to undertake a comprehensive and systematic study with emphasis on impact assessment. Secondly, monitor the implementation of the existing strategy via an evaluation of the performance of multilateral organizations and the drafting of a new development strategy. And thirdly, inform citizens, Greek citizens, on the multilateral development assistance of Greece in the framework of accountability and transparency. The key results of this evaluation was firstly that the majority of the multilateral organizations receiving Greek contributions follow an evaluation policy based on different criteria, of course, as defined by each organization. Furthermore, a large proportion of ministries are regularly informed by these organizations through evaluation reports or newsletters and are given the opportunity for a more thorough monitoring of their multilateral partners' work. Secondly, all organizations contribute significantly to the achievement of 2030 agenda and focus on the implementation of specific sustainable development goals according to the field of activity. Therefore, the country's contribution to multilateral organizations do have positive developmental impact in terms of achievement of one or more SDGs. Finally, in a general context, the evaluation of Greece's multilateral development cooperation is assessed as positive as the criteria set out in the methodology, transparency, accountability, relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, and sustainability contribute to the implementation of the SDGs. These criteria appear to be sufficiently met, and consequently, the outcome of this evaluation was supportive to Greece's strategic choice to focus mainly on multilateral development cooperation in the context of the recent economic and financial circumstances. Now, we'll turn to the bilateral assistance. As regards bilateral aid, the relevant ODA flows focus primarily on scholarships, humanitarian assistance, and on in-donor refugee costs, taking into account the steadfast national commitment towards assisting refugees in Greece. First of all, provision of scholarships. Greece places importance to the contribution of education to sustainable development. Hence, part of its development aid is focused on achieving SDG 4. Greece's investments in scholarships support partner country governments in making progress as far as their development goals are concerned by targeting critical skills gap. A number of ministries are involved in the provision of scholarships, like Ministry of Education, Foreign Affairs, and Ministry of Rural Development. In implementing DAC 2018 peer review recommendation on the Greek scholarship program, an ex-post evaluation of the Greek scholarship was conducted in 2019. This ex-post evaluation aimed at achieving a comprehensive mapping of the Greek scholarships program, formulate a single and consistent scholarship strategy, and thirdly, informing the citizens on Greek scholarships with a view to enhance accountability as regards the use of funds from the national budget. The second category is in-donor refugee costs. These mainly concern cost of education, accommodation, and health for the first 12 months according to the DAC statistical directives. In the area of education, the Ministry of Education created zones of educational priority, classes of reception, and tutorial classes of refugees at primary and secondary educational level, focusing also on gender equality. The reason behind these initiatives lies into contributing to the attainment of the following SDGs. Firstly, provide quality education, which is SDG 4, through the content and methodology of the analytical program specifically designed for the aforementioned structures. Secondly, minimize inequalities, SDG 10, based on the fact that the provision of quality education constitutes a national priority with regard to all children in Greece, including the refugees. And thirdly, create conditions of peace and social justice, SDG 16, promoting peaceful coexistence, social coherence, and democratic consciousness. The third category is humanitarian assistance. A certain degree of flexibility characterizes Greek humanitarian aid response, which usually takes place on an ad hoc basis, usually following a relevant needs assessment carried out by the competent Greek authority, the diplomatic authority abroad, and a request by a country concerned, or a call for funding by an international organization e.g. in the context of a pledging conference. Greek humanitarian aid has been focusing on countries in our geographic proximity, e.g. on African countries, and on countries affected by the Syrian crisis and the relevant massive displacement of populations, Lebanon, Afghanistan, etc. It is worth mentioning the recent visit of the Greek Foreign Minister Nikos Devnias to Odessa, that was on Sunday, head of a humanitarian aid mission. The humanitarian aid was handed to the city's municipal authorities. Greece aims to set up a continuous mechanism of distributing aid from Greece and to reopen the country's consulate in the city. Now, the way forward. The way forward for the Greek bilateral program of Greece. In February 2022, Hellenic Aid has a new law regarding development cooperation policy and organizational structure. We are also in the process of drafting a new presidential decree on the organization, staffing, and operation of international development or cooperation. And secondly, a new manual on implementing development cooperation programs by social partners. In addition, the 4-year international development cooperation policy for the period 2022-2025 has now been finalized. There are 4 vertical priorities in the international development cooperation policy. The first one is fight against poverty and hunger, SDG 1, health, SDG 3, education and culture, SDG 4, promoting sustainable economic growth, SDG 8. We have 3 horizontal priorities, environment and climate change, which are SDG 6, 7, 12, 13, 14, 15. Second, good governance and strengthening of democratic institutions, which is mainly SDG 16. Gender equality, SDG 5. Digital transformation, which is quite horizontal to all SDGs. In this context, the comparative advantages of Greece could be utilized by selecting areas in which Greece has made progress in the development of know-how due to adversity. Greece, as a Mediterranean country, faces adversities such as desertification, soil erosion, lack of water resources, small business size, marine pollution, etc. These adversities could be generative causes of comparative advantages for dealing with common problems. The fundamental principles that govern the development cooperation of Greece with our partner countries in the new international cooperation program is firstly, transparency in funding and full information to the Greek citizens. Secondly, the effectiveness of the assistance expressed through the 5 pillars: ownership, alignment, harmonization, effective management, and mutual responsibility. Thirdly, the viability of the programs and actions, and the compatibility with the national priorities and the international obligations and commitments of Greece. And the final one is the promotion and publicity of the programs and actions, accountability to the taxpayer. The bilateral programs aim at aligning priorities with partner governments guided by SDGs and national plans, strengthening and using local capacity and local systems, enabling results in deliver SDGs and serve those furthest behind, fostering reliable and trust-based partnerships responsive to the context and global challenges like climate, conflict, migration, etc. And finally, strengthening transparency and accountability on strategy, choices, use of resources, and results. Team Europe initiatives. Team Europe initiatives approach is a way of strengthening coordination, coherence, and complementarities of actions to scale up European impact and raise Europe as a partner of reference. The instrument of the EU, Global Europe, the so-called Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation, NDICI, channels the biggest share of external action funds with a budget of 79.5 billion. It contributes to eradicating poverty and promoting sustainable development, prosperity, peace, and stability. In this context, Greece participates in the Team Europe initiative's approach in order to strengthen coordination, coherence, and complementarity of actions with other European partners. Team Europe members are in the process of jointly designing Team Europe initiatives in line with the Council conclusions of April 2001. As part of the programming of EDITSI, Global Europe, Team Europe initiatives are being identified at both country and regional level. Finally, policy coherence and whole of government approach of an integrated programming and coordination is ensured within the Greek development cooperation system through the Interministerial Committee for Coordination of International Development Policy, members of which are the relevant ministries competent with the vertical and horizontal thematic priorities of the 4-year International Development Policy 2022-2025. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Nicolaide. Let us continue. Last but not least, the representative from the CECP donor participants is Mr. Zdenko Lucic. Mr. Lucic is a State Secretary, Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation at the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs. State Secretary with a very long experience, more than 15 years in attracting and facilitating domestic and foreign investments, regional and local development, as well as business process. He has extensive knowledge and experience in Croatian public and private sector, graduated from the Rochester Institute of Technology, NY, USA, and completed MBA postgraduate study at the University of Zagreb in Croatia. Before again giving the floor to Mr. Lucic, let me also give some flavor of insight and cooperation that we used to have with Croatia, not only as a huge supporter for the region as such, both in the process of European integration, but also reform process, as a transponer of the EU standards. Actually, during the last meeting that we had only 2 weeks ago, if I'm not wrong, Croatia expressed willingness to support even some of the projects that were proposed in the framework on the SEE2030 strategy implementation. Again, very grateful for your cooperation and help and support with the RCC. Mr. Lucic, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tanya. Esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to commend all the efforts Regional Cooperation Council has invested so far in the implementation of the Southeast Europe 2030 strategy. Croatia appreciates your engagement in assisting the participating states in this important endeavor. The region of Southeast Europe has been facing numerous challenges, and the regional strategy is one way to respond to these challenges even more effectively. It could grow into an exemplary model for implementing sustainable development goals through regional cooperation. Development cooperation and humanitarian assistance represent important aspects of foreign policy. They reflect the inherent human aspiration to uphold the progress of all human beings, regardless of their political, economic, and ideological interests. Since February 2011, Croatia no longer received the official development assistance and had officially became a donor state. We immediately started to integrate development cooperation policies into our foreign policy framework, taking into account international agreements and foreign policy priorities. This shift also defined the principles of Croatian development cooperation policy that are efficiency, transparency, and comparative advantage. After joining the European Union in 2013, Croatia took over the entire strategic and legislative framework of the EU in the field of development cooperation and humanitarian assistance policy. In practice, this meant that Croatian development policy became aligned with the principles of OECD Development Assistance Committee, the Agenda 2030 and its Sustainable Development Goals, as well as other internationally agreed norms. We've seen that EU as a leading force and a leading example in the Agenda 2030 implementation, just as it was the leading force during its negotiations. Croatia is a donor with unique first-hand experience of first being a recipient of ODA, which gives us high awareness and sensitivity for local needs and wider development context. We have acquired a post-war stabilization and reconstruction experience involving political economic transition, as well as our own national mine action system and demilitarization. These experiences remain in high demand worldwide. The brutal aggression against Ukraine is only its latest unfortunate reminder. Currently, Croatia is in the process of drafting a third national plan of development cooperation and humanitarian assistance, which will adequately reflect today's challenging global geopolitical situation. We are also regularly submitting the list of development and humanitarian projects to the OECD DAC as soon as non-DAC donor whose official development assistance amounts to $77 million US, thus representing 0.13% of gross national income. As previously mentioned, Agenda 2030 is one of the essential guidelines in implementing the Croatian development policy. Croatia identified geographical and thematic development cooperation priorities. Southeast Europe, Southern and Eastern neighborhood, and developing countries represent our geographical priorities, while the thematic priorities include dignity of every human being, peace and security, and development of democratic institutions and sustainable economic development. These objectives are in line with the Agenda 2030 and its 17 SDGs. The majority of our ODA is provided through multilateral channels, but we are also successfully implementing bilateral development projects primarily with partner countries in Southeast Europe, Eastern and Southern neighborhood. Throughout the years, development cooperation has increasingly diversified, moving away from traditional forms of support towards technical assistance and other non-financial forms of support that encourage sharing of knowledge and expertise. Here, our dual experience in first being an aid recipient, then a donor, proves to be valuable in assisting partner countries in a concrete way with well-thought, focused, and impactful projects. In this regard, a substantial number of development projects are being implemented in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is our development program country, and the country where we implemented the largest number of bilateral projects in 2020. Most of them were focused on health and education, along with projects fostering agricultural and infrastructural development that encourages sustainable production and economic growth. An exemplary project in this regard is a study tour organized in 2021 for high-level officials from Bosnia and Herzegovina who were introduced to the State of Israel's model of fostering agricultural production. They can now implement it for the benefit of their communities. We also initiated 2 landmark projects with UNDP in Albania. First, it is the project called Management of Marine and Coastal Pollution for Increased Safety at Sea and Ports, in line with the EU maritime law and policy. It was carried out in close cooperation between Croatian experts and Albanian authorities. Second, in response to the consequences of the major earthquake that hit Albania in 2019, we started a €1 million worth reconstruction of elementary school in the municipality of Kruje. In our view, the civil society is a valuable partner and essential component in the development process, as it easily manages to reach fragile communities and contributes significantly to a successful peace process. Thus, in 2021, through public call, the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs allocated financial contribution to the civil society organizations for development projects in the neighboring countries, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, Kosovo, and North Macedonia, and also Ukraine, Tanzania, and Kenya. We should not forget that the EU response to the COVID-19 pandemic through the Team Europe approach, to which Croatia made significant donations. Our total contribution to the Team Europe efforts is more than 21 million euros, and its largest portion was directed to the Southeast European countries. This includes emergency response to humanitarian needs, bilateral vaccine donations, and emergency assistance, as well as financial contribution to healthcare institutions in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Many global problems, including security environment issues, climate change, and growing inequalities, create obstacles towards prosperity. We are convinced that these challenges can be addressed best by acting jointly in synergy. Ladies and gentlemen, Croatia strongly supports the principle of wide partnership with shared responsibility among interested countries and international organizations, while respecting the local ownership and local implementation of the projects. Agenda 2030 is a shared responsibility of all states and all stakeholders. It represents a good platform to strengthen synergies and effectiveness of our policies. The global paradigm shift regarding the financing of development is also crucial in this equation. Moving beyond the traditional focus on ODA, combined with private investments and national resources, as well as fostering triangular cooperation, is the right way to succeed in Agenda 2030 implementation. Thank you very much.
Hvala Zdenko puno. Thank you very much, Mr. Lucic. With this, we of course finalized the list of the speakers during the panel. We still have some, not much, but some time for questions that the panelists might receive from the participants and those who are following us through social media, YouTube, or are online. I do have one question here asking for the OECD actually concrete ideas for the help and support in implementing SEE2030. I know that we discussed, we from the RCC actually much more with the OECD of the modalities of your cooperation in the implementation of the strategy SEE2030 and helping the SEE region, observing status in our monitoring committee, but maybe Mr. Šutek could go a little bit more into the details.
Thank you so much, Chair. I must say I have not been part of the discussions that went directly into the strategy, so I would not to pretend to have an in-depth knowledge of your strategy. Just to say that I believe that obviously your member countries, as various speakers outlined, really provide a very unique set of knowledge, as having been recipient of official development aid, as well as being provider of that. And as a number of the speakers have outlined, the panelists have outlined, being also very knowledgeable about certain areas and sectors and skill sets that are extremely important for other countries in the region. The strategy obviously is quite extensive. It goes into a number of areas that you have that are critical important for the region as such to develop. Altogether, the region is a very, very economic, big actor, and therefore has a lot of, I believe, potential moving forward. Again, in a combination of development cooperation, development finance, mobilizing national resources, but also leveraging, as the colleague from Croatia just had outlined, resources from other providers, respectively, from the private sector. So, Chair, back to you, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. For sure, there are opportunities for further cooperation in that respect, as you stated. and it's good to be aware that there are good ideas also floating around the region. In our chat box, I see Mr. Sain saying that he attended both meetings, both side events, yesterday and today, and we are very glad to provide the information as it was his conclusion. I don't see any additional comment or question. So instead of me giving the conclusions and not to take too much of your additional time, I would like to ask Umut Ergezer, who you all know, the coordinator for the strategy, to actually give us the concluding remarks of both yesterday and today event. And thank you very much again, the participants, both online and those who were panelists, for both your time and the ideas for the further cooperation in that respect. So, Umut, I will give you the floor for concluding the both side events.
Thank you, Tanya, and I would like to welcome to all our distinguished speakers and panelists today, as well as the representatives and participants who attend today's event also yesterday. So please let me take your couple of minutes to wrap up for today and yesterday discussion with our distinguished partners from SE Economies as well as OECD Secretariat. I may say that from these 2 days events, one of the main conclusions we can is all-inclusive regional ownership is the key factor to ensure relevance and commitment. Relevance and commitment create an adjustable and flexible strategic intervention. To ensure the relevance of our work here in Southeast Europe, with the real needs of our citizens, we will have to keep the strategy as flexible and adjustable as possible. A robust, strong monitoring mechanism, transparency, and enhanced consultation with all stakeholders are essential for sustaining the relevance. The war in Ukraine reminded us how peace and stability is directly related to sustainable economic development. We will have to consider mitigating the incoming destabilizing socioeconomic risks, such as access to food, increasing poverty and inequalities, and sustaining the humanitarian situation of refugees from Ukraine or those who came from Syria into account. We have to take into account those upcoming risks on our sustainable development growth. Our economies in SE are the countries hosting the highest number of Syrian and Ukrainian refugees, and we may need to adjust further our SE2030 to the new realities in our region to support our economies through regional cooperation and solidarity. We need to be very attentive to sustain permanent peace and stability in the SE region. RCC is ready to play its role as an umbrella regional cooperation organization in the SE to enhance peace and stability through its established mechanisms and promote its strengthening in line with the Sustainable Development Goals and SE2030. Solidarity between economies in Southeast Europe in reaching SDGs enhances growth-oriented governance and facilitates peace and stability. Effective ownership in Southeast Europe 2030 will have to spill over positively to aid effectiveness. More SDG responsive foreign aid. As RCC, we will also have to play a more active role in attracting the awareness of our donors to the SDGs and SE2030 strategy. As we discussed today, relying on development assistance is not enough to respond to the SDGs related challenges. National budget's responsiveness to SDGs and the contribution of development financing is important to cope these challenges. And these are also the priorities of the SE2030 strategy. This provides to us a further need to work and enhance regional cooperation programs financed by the donors towards SDGs based on the regional level commitment and willingness. RCC is therefore ready to avail itself to promote the SDGs and sustainable development-oriented growth agenda. SEE2030 strategy provides an appropriate framework which the partner economies in SCE may commit their willingness to reach sustainable development goals and align their development financing programs to support the regional actions jointly agreed by all the economies of SCE. Then as RCC, we can promote the harmonization of donors programs and priorities based on the 8 effectiveness principles of the Paris framework. In this endeavor, we consider the help of OECD extremely useful in our efforts. And with this, I would like to thank once more all the participants who attended our site events yesterday and today. I will back to you, Tanya. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much again. Thank you all. Looking forward to continuously work on you on the successful implementation of the SE2030. All the best. Have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye to all of you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.